They didn't change. They only started listening when you stopped speaking. They only realized you mattered when you stopped showing up every time they needed you. The more predictable you are, the less they value you. The more available you are, the more they assume you have nowhere else to be. You used to believe, if I'm just a little better, they'll appreciate me. But the truth is, the more you try to please, the more they disappear. Not because you weren't good enough, but because you were too available, and anything too available gets taken for granted. Your affection, your time, your presence. When you give too much, too easily, too often, it stops being a gift. It becomes an obligation. You text first. You check in first. You're always the one maintaining the connection, while the other person replies only when it's convenient. You've been there when they needed someone, physically and emotionally. But when it's your turn to be tired, to fall apart, to need someone to simply listen, all you hear is silence. And still, you make excuses for them. You tell yourself, maybe they're busy. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I'm asking for too much. No, you're not asking for too much. You're asking for what aligns with your worth. And if someone makes you feel guilty for simply expecting fairness, that's not someone you should stay with. Here's the truth. You don't have to shout to be respected. You just have to step away. A well-timed withdrawal can speak louder than 1,000 warnings. The absence you leave might be the only thing that wakes them up to everything they've taken for granted. Maybe you've believed that walking away is selfish, but what you haven't seen is that staying in a place where you're disrespected is a deeper betrayal, a betrayal of yourself. No one loves a doormat, and no one respects a person who doesn't protect their own boundaries. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become yourself if you're always living inside a version others expect from you? How can you be free if you keep forcing yourself to please? You think you're being kind, but deep down, it's fear. The fear of being abandoned, the fear that if you stop giving, they'll leave. But there comes a time when you have to ask yourself, if I have to trade my inner peace just to keep someone next to me, is that even real connection? No one has the right to stay in your life if their presence makes you slowly disappear. You don't need to explain why you're tired. You don't need to justify stepping back. And you don't need to apologize for learning to set boundaries. Sometimes, your absence isn't because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring for yourself. You stepped away, not to be pitied, but to reclaim the value your constant presence made them forget. And strangely enough, it's in your silence that your voice echoes loudest in their mind. You used to give so much, thinking it was the path to love. But sometimes, the only way to be seen is to disappear. They didn't change. You just stopped keeping the door open. Why do we so easily trade ourselves to hold on to shallow relationships? Why does your kindness become the reason you get taken advantage of? And what truly keeps you staying when deep inside you're already hurting? We'll go deeper. In the next part, what are you holding on to that's keeping you stuck in a place where you're clearly no longer respected? You don't need to say it. I already know. It's not love. It's not loyalty. It's something harder to admit. The fear of losing your worth once you're no longer needed. You've quietly taken on the role of the one who's always there. And that role has become a prison. You don't dare step away because you're afraid they'll forget you. You don't dare stay silent because you're afraid they'll think you don't matter anymore. But the truth is, the more you try to prove your worth, the more you hand over your power. You reply to texts instantly so they don't think you're cold. You rearrange your schedule to show up for them, even when you're drained. You swallow your anger, hold back your tears, force a smile, just to keep the peace, and you tell yourself, I'm fine. But deep down, you feel invisible. They don't really listen to you. They only hear enough to respond with what they want to say. They don't ask how you're doing, because they assume you're always okay. You've become the background in someone else's story, not the main character in your own. And the saddest part, you don't even know when it started. Only that. It's been a long time since anyone treated you like someone with limits. The real question isn't, why don't they respect you? It's, why are you still staying where you aren't respected? This isn't about right or wrong anymore. It's about how long you've allowed people to treat you like this. You thought being kind would earn you love, but with those who only take, the kinder you are, the more they push. You thought staying quiet would protect the peace, but sometimes the price of peace is you. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. You keep staying silent, not because you're noble, but because you're avoiding a truth. You've given too much, and you're terrified that if you stop, everything will fall apart. But truth demands to be faced, not covered up with excuses. You don't have to keep holding it together. You don't have to pretend you're okay when you're clearly being diminished. If you're always the one who reaches out, always the one who smooths things over, always the one who apologizes first, then maybe it's time to stop and ask yourself, honestly, is this still a connection or just one-sided endurance? And if the answer hurts, let it hurt. Not every pain needs to be fixed right away. Some pain needs to be felt, so you can gather enough strength to walk away. You already know all of this, but you haven't acted. Why? Because you've mistaken withdrawing for giving up. Because you believe that if you leave, you'll be the one who didn't try hard enough. But have you ever asked yourself, is holding on to something that's destroying your self-worth still called trying? Or is it just a silent form of self-destruction? You're not lacking strength. You just haven't used it in the right place. You're not lacking value. You're just in an environment that refuses to see it. And you're not lacking people who understand you. You've just stayed too long with those who never tried to. Be honest with yourself. Are you still being who you are? Or just a tired version, pretending to be okay? Always available, because you're afraid to lose something that may no longer even be worth keeping. In the next part, we'll go deeper into that forgotten emotional space, where you used to smile, just so no one would ask questions, where you used to say, I'm fine, just to keep a relationship that no longer had anything left to hold on to. You used to smile, just so people wouldn't ask if you were okay. You used to stay, even when every part of you wanted to leave. You used to nod, while something inside was screaming, I don't want to do this anymore. You got used to texting first, to reaching out, to making plans, to running back and forth to keep the connection alive, while the other side just waited, or worse, didn't even care. You got used to being the understanding one, the one who lets things slide, the one who forgives easily, the one who gets ignored. Over time, people just assumed you'd always be that way. No reactions, no expectations, no need to be prioritized. And the scariest part, it's not that they didn't need you, it's that they only needed you. As long as you stayed in the role of the one who always endured, you'd go to parties and sit quietly in the corner, polite, invisible, not asking for anything. You'd come home with that same polite smile, but once the lights turned off, you felt empty, like you'd been playing a character all day and forgot who you really were. You said, I'm fine, so often. You started believing it, even when your body was exhausted, even when your heart felt hollow, even when your mind was screaming, no, I'm not okay. Why do we accept living like this? Because the fear of being abandoned feels worse than being disrespected, because feeling like we belong, even in the wrong role, hurts less than standing alone in our truth. We confuse being accepted with being quietly used. We confuse love with emotional dependency. You used to think, if I just be better, more patient, more giving, they'll change. But no, the more you stepped back, the more they stepped over you, the more you swallowed, the more they ignored. This isn't your fault, but it is a truth you need to face. There comes a moment when you realize, how long has it been since anyone asked, what do you need? How long since you were the one being cared for first? You realize you don't expect that anymore. You automatically suppress your own needs, like a reflex. You shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort, and you begin to fade in your own life. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You think this is just your destiny. You think this is how you love, but in truth, you're replaying a deep pattern of submission that started long ago. Maybe it was a childhood without safety. Maybe it was being left behind too many times. Maybe it was the first time someone gave you attention, and you learned to please, just to keep them close. From that point on, you began to live in a role, the endlessly kind one, the giver with no conditions, the bigger person, even when your heart was breaking inside. And what you didn't realize is that this slowly kills your self-respect. Not because others are cruel, but because you never dared to set a boundary. A boundary isn't a wall. It's a mirror. It reflects back to others. This is how I allow you to treat me. When you don't hold up that mirror, they see nothing. And when they see nothing, they'll never know you're in pain. So if today you feel overlooked, disrespected, abandoned, pause. Not to blame them, but to face yourself and ask, how long have I stayed in places that made me feel small? Not every silence is defeat. Not every withdrawal is surrender. Sometimes it's the only conscious choice left. We've lived too long playing the role of the strong one. We've faked, I'm okay so well. People forget, we have feelings too. But eventually, endurance stops being a virtue and starts becoming betrayal. In the next part, we'll tell a true story. Someone who thought they were in love, but were really losing themselves in the role of the one who's always there. And the moment they stepped away, everything finally became clear. Emma was a kind person. She wasn't loud, flashy, or overly expressive. But whenever someone needed help, she was there. Her friends called her the glue of the group, because without her effort, the connection would fall apart. She was the one who planned the meetups, remembered everyone's birthdays, and quietly listened when someone was hurting. And she never complained, until one day, she started noticing something strange. No one reached out to her first. No one remembered her birthday. No one messaged her, unless they needed something. At first, she told herself, everyone's probably just busy. Then she decided to test it. She stopped texting first, stopped checking in, stopped organizing plans. She went silent. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. No one noticed. No one asked. No one felt like anything was missing. That's when Emma realized something painful. She wasn't important. She was just convenient. The same pattern showed up in her relationship. Alex, her boyfriend, said he loved her because she was easy to be around. Emma never argued, never complained. She cleaned up, adjusted everything, smoothed every rough edge to keep Alex comfortable. But slowly, she started to notice Alex never asked if she was tired. He didn't care about her job, didn't remember the details of the things that stressed her out. The only thing he seemed to care about was whether she was still cheerful enough to keep his life running smoothly. One day, after finishing a long project, Emma said, "I'm tired today. Can we stay in?" Alex frowned. Tired? Tired from what? You haven't even done anything. Just one sentence. But it cut like a knife. Not because it was harsh, but because it exposed the truth. He had never really seen her. He only saw what he needed from her. That night, Emma stood in front of the mirror for a long time. She didn't cry, but something in her gaze changed. She realized she had given up too much, just to hold on to connections that weren't even real. She realized she wasn't proud of her kindness anymore. It had started to feel like a sentence, and so she withdrew. No messages, no explanations, no blaming. She simply stopped showing up. At first, no one noticed. A day, 3 days, a week. Then, the messages started trickling in. "Hey, haven't seen you around. You doing okay? Feels like something's missing." Alex called, over and over. He was angry. He was confused. Then he panicked. But it was too late. Emma had seen the truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. A month later, Emma moved out. Not to run away, but to start a life where she didn't have to carry the role of the one who's always there. She began learning how to live for herself. She went for walks, without telling anyone. She had dinner at places she liked, without asking what someone else wanted. She listened to her body, rested when she was tired, said no when she needed to. She didn't stop being kind, but she stopped being unconditionally available. She started setting boundaries, and with that, she began to see clearly who truly respected her and who was just feeding on her endless tolerance. Emma didn't become cold. She was still kind, but no longer easy, still willing, but no longer unquestioning. And strangely enough, the new people who entered her life respected her more, not because they were better, but because she had changed the way she allowed others to treat her. Emma's story isn't rare. It's a reflection of thousands, maybe millions, of people who are living like obedient versions of themselves. They don't need pity. They don't need rescuing. They just need one clear moment to step away at the right time. And often, it's not when you shout, beg, or explain, but when you quietly disappear, that those left behind are forced to confront the emptiness they created. Why does kindness without boundaries lead to being taken for granted? Why is it only when we vanish that others start to see our worth? And how do we set boundaries without drowning in guilt? In the next part, we'll break down the cycle of being the one who's always available and explore why stepping away isn't giving up. It's an act of deep self-respect. No, they didn't change. You just stopped opening the door every time they knocked. No, you're not selfish for stopping your giving. You simply began to understand. Value doesn't come from sacrifice. It comes from boundaries. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And what's more frightening than being disrespected by others is getting so used to it that you stop noticing it's wrong. You've played a role for too long. The one who's always there, the kind one, the understanding one. But every role has a limit. If you have to constantly force yourself to maintain it, it's no longer your essence. It's a survival strategy. And survival strategies always demand a price. Why does being always available make you less valued? Because people assign value based on rarity. A person who's always there doesn't need to be prioritized. A person who always understands doesn't need explanations. A person who always tolerates doesn't require change. What is always present stops being seen as special. The more you make your presence easy, the more people forget you can walk away. This isn't malice, it's psychology. And when you understand this, You stop blaming and start rewriting the rules. R. Why do they only notice your worth when you walk away? Because you've disrupted a pattern. They got used to you being there. So used to it, they forgot it was a choice. When you step back, they're forced to ask, what did your presence use to hold together? What worries did you quietly manage? What role did you play in their emotional stability? When you were there, everything felt fine. When you disappeared, everything felt off. And it's that disruption that finally reveals the truth. Their peace had been quietly built on your silent sacrifices. San. So, should you keep tolerating just to stay needed? No, because that would turn you into someone addicted to being needed, while slowly losing your own identity. You don't have to be needed to be valuable. You are valuable, even when you give nothing, simply because you exist. Fully human. Stoicism teaches one clear truth. We can't control others, only how we respond. So when people start treating you with disregard, you don't need to do more to earn their recognition. You only need to do one thing: withdraw your energy. Withdraw, not out of anger, but because you're finally clear. Be silent, not out of weakness, but because your words are no longer needed. Say no, not out of bitterness, but because now you know you have the right to stop. But isn't stepping back cold, unloving? No. In truth, stepping back is an act of deep love towards yourself, because you no longer let others touch your wounds as if it were their right. You no longer patch up shallow connections with quiet self-betrayal, because now you know, if I don't protect my own limits, no one else will do it for me. Seneca once said, if you want to be loved, love yourself first. And sometimes, loving yourself begins with a sentence that's clear and calm. I'm not as available as I used to be. Woo. What happens when you set boundaries? The kind will respect them. The selfish will get angry. And that shows you who deserves to stay and who needs to leave. Stoicism never teaches us to be cold or detached. It teaches us real love exists within clear boundaries. If someone only loves you when you're easy to control, easy to reach, easy to manipulate, then that's not love. That's possession. That's exploitation. A soft form of manipulation, but one that erodes you over time. No, you're not too sensitive. You're simply real in a world that has grown too fake. No, you're not asking too much. You've just spent too long giving too much and receiving too little. If they truly cared, they'd ask why you stepped back. If they only cared about their needs, they'd blame you for no longer being as easy to control. In the next section, we'll repeat and reinforce the core message that stepping away is not weakness, but a profound act of self-respect. You don't need them to see you. You only need one thing: to stop dimming your own light. You don't need them to understand you. You only need to stop waiting for it from those who never truly listened. You don't have to always be kind, always on time, always available, always agreeable. You only need this: know your worth, and stop quietly discounting it. You used to text first. You used to keep the connection alive. You used to think, if I just stay patient, things will change. No, they didn't change. You just kept hoping. No, you're not too sensitive. You're simply real, in a world that has forgotten how to be. No, you're not lonely. You're just surrounded by people who don't know how to truly connect. Repeat this and let it sink in. No one can see you when you're always there, without boundaries. Too much ease kills value. Too much availability kills presence. The more accessible you are, the more people forget you have the right not to be. The more easily you forgive, the more people forget you know how it feels to hurt. The more patient you are, the more people assume you don't have emotions. So remember this, line by line. Like a quiet wake-up call, you walked away, not for revenge. You stayed silent, not to hide. You pulled back, not because you're weak, but because you finally saw things clearly. You no longer wanted to hold on to something that was no longer true. You learned how to come back to yourself. Your presence is a gift, and gifts should not be given away just because you're afraid of being left behind. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury, and the greatest difference is that you no longer need them to know who you are." So yes, they only see your worth when you walk away. They only start respecting you when you stop overgiving, not because you were invisible, but because you let them overlook you for too long. Let's bring back the line from the beginning, so it echoes again. You weren't abandoned. They just got used to you always being available. You weren't meaningless. They just forgot how much you mattered. When you stopped being a habit, let your silence become a mirror. Let your absence carve out a space so wide and so still that they're finally forced to face themselves. Because awakening doesn't always come from a lesson. Sometimes it comes from a void that nothing else can fill. You've been silent long enough, but don't use that silence to suffer. Use it to stand tall. Use it so you never again have to trade pieces of yourself just to stay somewhere. You were never truly seen. And in the final part, we'll open a new door, not how to be respected, but how to live, without needing to prove your worth to anyone, ever again. You've gone through enough to understand. Not everyone who walks away is cruel, and not everyone who stays is sincere. Sometimes you have to step out of that familiar cycle, not because you're noble, not because you're trying to prove something, but because you no longer have a reason to keep trading yourself away, just to hold on to something that's no longer whole. You once stayed because you were afraid they'd be hurt, but you forgot who's been hurting the most this whole time. You tried so hard, thinking that meant strength. But maybe it's time to ask yourself, are you fighting or just afraid of the truth that you were never really chosen? Self-respect isn't a slogan. It's quiet action. It's when you stop replying to late-night messages just to soothe someone else's chaos. It's when you stop explaining your feelings to people who never cared to understand them. It's when you walk away, not to make a scene, not hoping to be noticed, but simply because you're done pretending. You don't need an apology. You don't need them to change. You only need, once, to trust your own feelings and act on them. They might never understand what you gave. That's okay. You no longer need them to. They might call you cold, or distant, or difficult. That's okay, too. Because in the end, what you truly need is not someone else's forgiveness, but your own return to yourself. You've done too much in silence. Now is the time to do just one thing, loudly. Stand, walk, and hold your silence like a mountain. No one sees it. That's okay. No one acknowledges it. Still, okay. No one knows how much you've hurt. Let it be. Because this time, you're not doing it to be seen. You're doing it because you finally know who you are, and you will not accept anything less than that again. If you're hearing this now, and your heart feels heavy, I can't be there to hold you. I can't give you the perfect advice for your life. But I can tell you this with complete honesty. You are not alone, and you are not wrong for finally walking away. You might feel empty for a while. You might miss being needed. Even if it was selfish, you might second-guess yourself and feel the urge to go back. But pause, just for a moment, and you'll realize You didn't lose anyone, you're just returning to the one person who's been abandoned the longest, yourself. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is not the absence of love, but its complement. It is the profound presence of the self." Maybe no one else is by your side right now, but you still have yourself, and that's where everything begins again. If something still feels stuck in your chest, don't rush to forget. Just pause, breathe long enough to see clearly, and choose yourself again. You've spent long enough being the kind one no one ever asked. Are you tired? Long enough to know no one can love you, right? If you don't start loving yourself with clarity, and if today you choose to withdraw, to keep a part of yourself sacred and unshared, then let me just say, you are not alone, and you don't owe anyone an apology. If you've ever been hurt for being too kind, if you've ever been overlooked for always being available, then watch the next video. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Carl Jung. A deeper message for those who've been broken but never gave up.